Welcome back. And if you are a Sagittarius, slow down for a moment and listen carefully, because this is not a prediction. This is a rare moment when life itself begins to answer everything you have endured over the past 10 years. January 2026 does not simply open a new year. It closes an old cycle. And to understand why this moment matters so deeply, we need to return to the long road Sagittarius has been quietly walking all this time. From around 2012, all the way to the final days of 2025, Sagittarius has walked a road that, looking back, many would wonder how you managed to endure for so long. This was not a straight path, not a road with clear signs, and not a journey where each step came with certainty. It was more like moving forward through thick fog, knowing you had to keep going, but unable to see what was waiting ahead. There were periods when Sagittarius felt completely lost, not because you lacked dreams, but because constant upheaval forced every plan to change the moment it took shape. Choices you once believed in suddenly felt fragile. Paths you thought would last a lifetime closed far sooner than expected. And more than once, you found yourself returning to the starting point, not empty-handed, but carrying a heavy heart, asking quietly, why does everything have to be this hard? Throughout that time, your faith in the future slowly wore down, not loudly, not dramatically, just the quiet feeling of waking up each morning and wondering if all your effort was truly leading anywhere. There were days you kept working, kept caring for others, kept fulfilling your responsibilities. Yet, inside, there was an emptiness you could not quite name. You did not give up, but you were no longer certain you were heading in the right direction. Life during those years felt like constant motion, changing environments, changing roles, changing the way you saw yourself. Sometimes it was a shift in career, sometimes a shift in relationships, sometimes a complete redefinition of what truly mattered. And no matter how much you moved, one familiar feeling followed you everywhere, the sense that you were walking without knowing exactly where you were going. What made this period so defining was not the number of challenges, but the way they came, one after another, leaving little time to rest or stabilize. Just as you adapted, another disruption appeared. Just as you began to believe things might finally settle, life asked you to adjust once more. Sagittarius learned flexibility not by choice, but because there was no other option. And yet, there is a truth you can only see when you reach the far end of this road. Those years were not meaningless. They did not come to punish you. They did not come to take anything away. They came to shape you, to build resilience without hardening your heart, to teach adaptation without stripping away your true nature, to forge an inner strength strong enough to stand steady even as everything around you shifted. If you look back at the Sagittarius you were in 2012, you will see a different person, perhaps more innocent, perhaps more trusting, perhaps more easily wounded. And if you look at yourself at the end of 2025, you will realize that despite the exhaustion, the doubts, the scars that never fully disappeared, you are still here, still walking forward, still refusing to abandon yourself. That alone speaks volumes about the strength you have gathered, even if you never gave it a name. You learned how to rise without an audience, how to keep going when no one could promise things would be okay. And in that quiet persistence, something deep within you began to shift. You may not feel it clearly yet. You may still carry questions without answers. But somewhere, very deep inside, a gentle movement is taking place, like light slipping through a half-opened door. Not blinding, not rushed, just enough to let you know that this difficult journey, no matter how harsh it was, has been leading you somewhere new, somewhere you have never been before. And as your breath begins to slow, as your steps grow lighter, you may start to sense it. You are no longer just surviving. You are preparing to enter a new rhythm of life, one where everything begins to carry deeper meaning, greater peace, and a truer alignment with who you really are. And then, as the final days of the old year quietly faded away, Sagittarius began to sense something different. Not a loud turning point, no bells, no dramatic signal, Just one morning in January 2026, you woke up and realized the air around you had changed, lighter, more open, as if an invisible weight that had pressed against your chest for years had finally loosened its grip. This shift did not arrive from the outside, not at first. It began within you, a feeling difficult to name, yet clear enough to let you know you no longer had to brace yourself the way you once did. The thoughts that used to repeat endlessly, the questions that kept you awake night after night, they were still there, but they no longer held complete control. You began to breathe more deeply, more slowly, and for the first time in a long while, you no longer felt the urgency to prove anything to life. As January 2026 unfolded, Sagittarius found yourself standing before a door you had never noticed before. Not because the door was newly created, but because only now were you still enough to recognize it had always been there. The invisible limits that once made everything feel strangely difficult began to dissolve. Efforts that had been blocked without explanation now had room to move forward. No longer did it feel like every step ahead pulled you backward again. Things were no longer stuck. Decisions began to receive clearer responses from life. You took an action, and you could see its effect, whether large or small. The feeling of pouring water into a broken container slowly disappeared. Opportunities began to appear in very human ways. Not flashy, not magical, but real enough to grasp. Clear enough that you no longer had to guess whether you were moving in the right direction. What made this phase so remarkable was the calm it brought with it. Sagittarius was no longer driven by choices made out of fear of missing out, fear of falling behind. You began to understand the value of discernment. Invitations appeared, paths opened, new connections entered your life, and this time, you did not rush to say yes. You allowed yourself to observe, to feel, to choose based on true alignment, not pressure, not urgency. This realization became undeniable. This was not temporary luck, not a brief moment of brightness destined to fade. It carried a different rhythm, slower but steadier, deeper but lasting. Life began to take on structure, order, a quiet sense that what you were building now would not collapse the way it once did. In January 2026, Sagittarius began to see life through new eyes. You no longer questioned whether you deserved stability. You began to understand that after everything you had endured, you did not need to pay any further price to be at peace. Peace was no longer a reward reserved for those who suffered long enough. It became a natural state, when you lived in rhythm with who you truly are. There were small moments, yet deeply meaningful. A decision made without inner conflict. An afternoon that passed without guilt for resting. A plan formed without the fear it might collapse at any moment. These ordinary moments were the clearest signs that you were entering a completely different season of life. And as you grew familiar with this new rhythm, something even deeper began to surface. You were no longer focused on simply surviving year after year. You began to think farther, longer, about what you wanted to build, about the kind of life you wished to wake up to each morning, about the sense of calm you wanted to carry with you, not for a month, not for a year, but for many years to come. The door had opened, quietly, without spectacle, yet wide enough for you to step through without bowing your head or shrinking yourself. And standing there, you began to realize that what awaited you was not just opportunity, but a new way of living, a longer journey, a deeper one, where your choices were no longer made only to resolve the present moment, but were gently laying the foundation for a very long future. One where peace and prosperity are no longer luxuries, but become a natural part of how you move through life. And within this newly found calm, Sagittarius begins to realize something deeply important. Life is no longer asking you to endure more. The years of clenching your teeth through hardship, of holding back your desires, of setting your dreams aside just to survive, it feels as though they have fulfilled their purpose. A different rhythm of life is quietly taking its place, gentler, yet carrying real weight. This is the rhythm of someone who has begun to harvest from everything they once lived through. What once exhausted you is no longer just painful memory. It has become lived experience, present in how you think, how you respond, how you choose. You are no longer as naive as before, but you are not bitter either. You have learned to face reality directly without losing faith in the future. Lessons that once cost you tears, time, and silent losses have now become strengths no one can take from you. Sagittarius begins to feel clearly that your inner strength has changed. Not the reckless courage of the early days, but a steadiness born from standing in chaos and not collapsing. You are no longer afraid of change the way you once were. Not because you believe change is easy, but because you know you can adapt. You have done it too many times before. And this truth gives you a very quiet kind of confidence, one that does not need to prove itself or be displayed. The energy of expansion during this phase arrives faster than you might expect. Opportunities that once took forever to appear, that were delayed without explanation, now begin to surface in a different rhythm. Not overwhelming, but steady. Not shocking, but clear enough for you to recognize that life is responding to what you quietly planted along the way. There is, however, something crucial to understand. This expansion does not belong to prolonged hesitation. It only truly works when you dare to step forward. You will notice that if you pause too long, if you remain still out of fear of making mistakes, the current will not stop to wait for you, not as punishment, but because this is a phase of resonance. Life reflects back the level of trust you place in yourself. When you move with clarity, more doors open. When you move with doubt, that doubt is amplified, making everything feel heavier than it needs to be. There will be moments when Sagittarius stands before a familiar choice. One path feels safe, but no longer alive. Another path is not yet fully clear, yet it makes your heart respond in a very real way. Before, you may have chosen safety out of fear of losing again. But now, you begin to see that you are no longer fragile. You no longer sacrifice all your peace just to test your luck. You choose steps taken with awareness, with grounding, with preparation, yet you do not turn away from what makes you feel truly alive. The harvest of this phase is not only found in external results, it lives in how you perceive yourself. You begin to trust that what you carry within you is enough. You do not need to become someone else. You do not need to chase an image to be worthy of recognition. You have come far enough to understand this. Your value does not depend on whether life challenges you, but on how you rise each time it does. And in the most ordinary moments, the most everyday scenes, you begin to notice the deepest shift of all. You no longer feel as though you are fighting against life. You are cooperating with it, listening to it, responding with more mature choices. You allow yourself to step into new spaces, new relationships, new roles, not with blind excitement, but with grounded trust. As this rhythm becomes familiar, Sagittarius begins to understand something profound. This season of harvest is not an ending. It is an invitation to step deeper into building something that lasts. Not temporary success, but a way of living capable of supporting you for many years ahead. And as that understanding quietly settles in, you begin to feel more ready than ever to consider what will be kept, what will be nurtured, and what will be built with intention. As if life itself is gently placing the next question in your hands, waiting to see how you choose to live in response. And when Sagittarius grows familiar with the feeling of no longer having to brace yourself just to survive, something very natural begins to unfold. You are no longer focused only on how to get through tomorrow. You begin to ask a different question. What are you building for the long road ahead? Not from anxiety, but from a quiet sense of maturity. Like someone who has traveled far enough to understand that not every road needs to be run at full speed, but every road does require a foundation strong enough to last. In that stillness, Sagittarius begins to look at work, purpose, and direction through a different lens. The question is no longer, what do I need to do to survive? But what do I want to offer to this life? It may come as a major shift, not loud, but decisive. It may be the choice to step away from what no longer reflects who you truly are, Or perhaps, for the first time, you allow yourself to pursue a goal that does more than provide income, one that gives your mornings meaning when you wake up. Sagittarius begins to understand that a long-term path does not have to be the safest one by old standards, but it must be a path that is honest with yourself. You are no longer drawn to success that demands the sacrifice of your peace. You begin to build step by step, slower, but with depth. Career decisions are no longer reactions to pressure. They become conscious choices, guided by intention, direction, and a vision that reaches far beyond the next few years. At the same time, your relationship with money begins to shift, not toward greater ambition, but toward clarity. After years of uncertainty, Sagittarius no longer wants to live with a constant undercurrent of worry about the future. You stop chasing unstable sources of income out of fear of missing out. Instead, you learn to respect sustainability, steady streams, long-term financial decisions, plans that are not designed to create instant miracles, but to bring peace of mind when you look ahead. You begin to see that stability is not boredom. It is solid ground that allows creativity without the fear of collapse. Money no longer measures your worth. It becomes a tool, one that supports living in rhythm with who you are. And as this relationship becomes healthier, a deep sense of relief settles in. You no longer need to prove that you can always manage on your own. You allow yourself to build slowly, with intention, with structure, with room to breathe. Yet the most profound change happens in a very quiet place, inside. Sagittarius begins to realize that many beliefs you have carried for years no longer fit. The belief that you are only worthy when you struggle. The belief that stability is a luxury not meant for you. Those ideas once made you strong during difficult times, but now they have begun to weigh you down. And gently, you start to lay them aside, not through rejection, but through understanding. You recognize that you once needed those beliefs to survive the storm, but now that the ground beneath you is steadier, you no longer need to carry them. You allow yourself to believe that life can be lighter and still be deep, that peace does not make you weak, that stability does not take away your freedom. It gives you the space to breathe and to live more fully. As your inner world becomes steadier, the outer world responds in subtle ways. Doors that once resisted no longer do. Aligned relationships appear naturally. Opportunities arrive at the right moment, without force. You no longer chase life. You walk alongside it. And in the most ordinary, most real moments, you realize something quietly powerful. You are laying the first stones of a long road ahead, one where you are not merely surviving, not merely harvesting, but truly living in harmony with what you do, what you have, and who you are becoming. And as the inner foundations slowly grow steady, Sagittarius begins to recognize something truly important. This new phase no longer asks you to brace yourself. Life is no longer testing you through sudden collisions, but through a far subtler question. How will you live when you are no longer forced to be strong? When you no longer need to prove how much you can endure? Instead of pressure, what is placed in your hands now is choice. The choice of rhythm, the choice of how you treat your time. And here, discipline appears, but it no longer wears a harsh face. It is not about forcing yourself into rigid structure. It feels more like a quiet promise you make to yourself, a gentle commitment that each day, no matter how busy or tired you feel, you will do one small thing to care for the path you are walking. Sagittarius begins to build habits, not to control life, but to support it. A morning that starts a little slower, a quiet space to think before stepping into the day, a decision made with awareness instead of reaction. These small acts, when repeated consistently, begin to create a deep sense of stability, not the kind that keeps you still, but the kind that prevents you from being swept away. Action in this phase carries a different quality as well. Sagittarius no longer moves in bursts of excitement, only to burn out and abandon the journey. You learn to move slowly, but steadily. Each step does not need to be perfect. It only needs to be consistent. You begin to understand that quiet persistence is always stronger than short-lived explosions of effort. And within that steadiness, a durable strength begins to take shape. Flexibility becomes the most essential key you carry into this new cycle. After all the changes you have lived through, Sagittarius knows that life will never stand completely still. But instead of fearing change, you begin to welcome it. Not with recklessness, but with the ability to adjust. When a plan no longer fits, you allow yourself to change it without self-blame. When a road requires a turn, you turn calmly, without panic. This flexibility keeps you from being trapped by old expectations. You stop forcing yourself to live up to an outdated version of who you were. You allow yourself to grow, to shift, to mature at a natural pace. And this creates a very different kind of freedom. Not the freedom of doing whatever you want, but the freedom of knowing where you are and where you are going. The year 2026 unfolds as a series of days that seem ordinary. Not every moment carries a major milestone. Not every day feels explosive. Yet within those days, long-term effects begin to form. Each small decision made with awareness. Each habit maintained even for just a few minutes a day. Each moment you choose calm over fear. All of it is quietly shaping a new trajectory for your life. You may not notice it right away, but one day, looking back, you will realize you have come very far without exhaustion. You will see that your life is no longer ruled by extreme swings, but guided by inner steadiness. And within this new rhythm, Sagittarius begins to feel a deep and lasting trust. Trust that you can keep moving forward, no matter how the road ahead may change, because you are no longer relying on circumstances alone. You are relying on your ability to adapt, your gentle discipline, and the quiet persistence you have been building day after day. And as Sagittarius grows comfortable, walking steadily within this new rhythm of life, a very quiet awareness begins to surface. Not a grand realization, not a powerful declaration, just the subtle sense that the time ahead no longer feels blurred. January 2026 does not pass like a simple mark on the calendar. It stands there like a hinge, a delicate point of connection between everything that has already been lived and everything still waiting to take shape. You can feel it in the way you look toward the future, no longer with rushing anxiety, no longer with distant dreams that lack grounding, but with a rare clarity. The road ahead, even if not fully revealed, is now bright, enough for you to trust each step you take. Not because the journey will be easy, but because you have become someone who can move through difficulty without losing yourself. There were doors that had been open for a long time, yet before now, you were not ready to walk through them. Not because you were weak, but because you were carrying too much fear, too many unanswered questions. Now, as you stand before those same opportunities, you no longer feel the need to rush. You stand taller, calmer, and for the first time, you understand that you have the right to choose how you enter the future, rather than being pushed into it by circumstance. The path has become clearer not because every obstacle has disappeared, but because you are no longer unaware of your own strength. The years behind you have taught you how to distinguish between the noise of fear and the true voice of intuition. You no longer need someone else to tell you that you are on the right path. You begin to trust the inner knowing shaped through countless falls and quiet recoveries. And here, choice becomes the most essential thing of all. Not the dramatic, life-altering decisions made in a single moment, but the deeply human ones. You choose how you respond when things do not go as planned. You choose how you treat yourself when you are tired. You choose whether to keep moving forward or to pause and listen. Each small choice is quietly sketching the outline of the next 20 years of your life. Action now carries a different meaning as well, no longer driven by scarcity or the fear of falling behind, but guided by self-respect and trust. You work not to prove your worth, but to nourish the life you want to live. You build not because you fear loss, but because you wish to preserve what truly matters. And then, your attitude toward life becomes the deepest foundation of all. An attitude of acceptance without surrender, of effort without self-punishment, the understanding that life does not need to be a constant battle to be meaningful. Peace is no longer something you must search for somewhere far away. It begins to appear in the way you breathe, in the way you choose silence when it is needed, in the way you allow yourself to rest without guilt. Prosperity no longer requires the sacrifice of health or inner peace. It arrives as a natural result of living in rhythm with yourself. When you stop resisting the current and learn to move with it. When you understand what is enough, and also know that you deserve more in a healthy way. Looking back, Sagittarius will realize that the new era did not begin with a dramatic moment, but with a quiet inner shift, a new belief, a new way of living, a permission to step into the future without carrying the weight of the past. And in that stillness, you will feel something very clearly. You are no longer standing at the threshold. You are already inside. Life is no longer opening itself to test you once again, but to walk alongside you on a long journey where each passing day can become part of peace, of fulfillment, and of a life built through your own conscious choices.